Hello and welcome, Exiles, to a look at some of the best builds of mine from 326. This is not a comprehensive list, just some of the ones that stuck out to me. These are builds that are not necessarily league start specific, okay? They're just characters that I thought were really good in 326. They didn't get nerfed, and I say, hey, think about this as a potential second build, or work out a way to league start it, something where you can transition to it. I have in that list Forbidden Rite Occultist, cast on crit. Probably my favorite build of 326, was a lot of fun to play, and his damage and defensive scaling was just nuts. Energy Blade Inquisitor, I didn't play this in 326, but it's the same as it was the past 3 patches. It hasn't been nerfed. I updated the build a bunch last patch, and I'll go over some recommendations for it this patch based on the new Bloodline Ascendancies. The Animate Weapon of Self-Reflection Necromancer. This was a energy blade if you want to go more offensive, or ephemeral edge if you want to go more defensive. This is plays kind of like an SRS. And then Righteous Fire Scion. So Necromancer, Animate Weapon, and Forbidden Rite Occultist I did play in 326. Righteous Fire Scion and Energy Blade I did not. They're just builds I'm very familiar with and updated the guides for. And that information is virtually unchanged going into this next patch / buffed. So for example, the Righteous Fire and the Energy Blade Inquisitor, these ones I will have campaign runs for that I can link to show you how they look in the campaign if you're league starting from a fresh character, as well as the guides go into a progression. They're much more filled out, fleshed out POBs, whereas the Necromancer and Occultist, these were builds I did later on in the league. And I also have videos where I showcase them on much lower budgets, basically cutting a lot of the costs out of the characters for people that were saying, hey, how can you do this on a cheaper setup, what to do. That's what some of these videos are going to be. And I'm going to go over each of these in a bit of detail. First, let's talk about the patch notes. What all changed for these characters? For FRoSS, virtually nothing except for the Whispers amulet. The big question mark on FRoSS is how rare is the amulet going to be? They made the ES roll much lower. It went from up to 400 top end to 100 top end. This will result in about 10% less ES and 10% less damage overall. In my mind, that's a fairly small nerf. This build was very overkill for how good it was at defeating the content, and I think this character will still be amazing in the next patch, given the fact that all we know is that was the nerf that occurred, and on top of that, the Occultist's 4th and 3rd ascendancies were only kind of mid. For example, the last ascendancy I grabbed on this was 15% more chaos, with Wither occurring once per second, and they would last 15 seconds. We had Wither on hit from getting overwhelming malice, I think is the notable. Basically, it gives you access to Unholy Might, which gives you chance to Wither on hit, and we hit a bunch of times a second. We were getting capped Wither without the Occultist, which made that node effectively give only 15% more damage. The likelihood we take a buff from one of these Bloodline Ascendancies that can beat 15% more damage is very, very high. So, small nerf on the ES roll of Whispers. The question mark factor is, did they change the drop rarity of Whispers? It will still be an extremely desirable amulet. If it's the same drop rate as last league, boom, you're home free. It'll be not too expensive to put together. If they make it a 2% drop rate, or they move it to the Uber version of the boss, all of a sudden that amulet will be expensive. So for this build, it's one of those things where I would say play a different witch and have your league start figured out for a different witch, and then wait and see, is Whispers a cheap item? It is great. Get some gear, swap into it. You're going to have a good time. If Whispers is not a cheap item, you're going to have to farm more to do it. So that's FRoSS cast on crit Occultist. As for Energy Blade Inquisitor, the big thing about this build guide is I assumed GGG would do some level of balancing for Dorianis. Obviously, last league, we showed up to find out Mercenaries and Dorianis were free, and you just go minus 200 lightning res like no big deal, which was a huge buff to this character. This character did not need it. The guide I made assumed it wasn't going to be just plug in and get free minus 200 res. So the guide is actually set up for not having that, having the Inquisitor ignore res. But whenever somebody came in and asked me during Mercenary League, I was like, hey, just drop that ascendancy point, go grab the minus res on Dorianis, and you're free. So luckily, this guide, strangely enough, is more up to date than it would have been if I had assumed Dorianis was going to be as free as it was last league. The big thing about this character is, again, the 4th and 3rd ascendancy, the Pen ascendancy and the enemies take 16% increase in ascendancy. Those are only kind of mid-tier ascendancies. Late game, you can go for Awakened Lightning Pen. You can target some more minus res. It's not necessarily going to be best in slot. It is for a long time that the ignore res is a very good node, but late game, it's something that could be beaten out. So this falls into the category of Bloodline ascendancies will be a nice buff for this character because its 4th lab definitely was only 16% increased damage taken, which is not huge. And its 3rd lab could also end up being beaten out by penetration. So keep an eye on those Bloodline ascendancies. This definitely could take some big buffs from those, as well as the things like Red Dream, which I will reference this for the Scion as well. If you're on the Ivory Tower, the earlier budget setup, you care about that level of life scaling. That is a big buff to Ivory Tower builds. Eventually, late game, that you go CI with this character in the high-end gearing. But while you're Ivory Tower, that could be something to consider. I imagine that thing is going to be a premium, though, considering every life build in the game is going to want that jewel. It's very, very strong. Next up, we have the Animate weapon of self-reflection, Necromancer. This is a character where, again, I took it and I added in a budget version of the character, see how cheap we could make the character, and that's right around here, versus this high-end character. I have basically multiple variations on the build of progression of budget. A few different videos I posted on it, but for the sake of the video, we'll just go over the fact there's a late game version and there's a budget version, and you can look up the in-between versions of the videos if you want to, but in the description, those are the ones I'm going to include. This plays like an SRS, where you basically just pop your minions down and run around. It's a good time. If you ask me, probably one of the funnest minions builds I've ever played. I really just love seeing the lightsabers just whack on enemies and they pile up around them, and the lightsabers just a cool aesthetic. So definitely one of my personal favorites of the league. And the big change this one got, and this is probably the most notable nerfs of any of these 4 builds, is we did use Doriani Merc in this build. However, I was a bit lazy in terms of access to pen. I didn't use the pen mastery that you can get on the Ascendancy. I didn't bother putting pen onto one of the links. I could have gone Conductivity Curse. I was running Punishment. There's a lot of ways you can force minus res or target res a lot better if you know you're not playing with Doriani's Merc. And quite frankly, I think this will still be fairly strong with that all considered. So keep that in mind. For the Inquisitor, I didn't showcase any footage with Doriani Merc because it was recorded before Mercenaries, and I thought Doriani's wasn't going to work. So that one, no worries there. This Necromancer, however, did have the footage was with Doriani Mercs. Granted, they were not min-max Doriani Mercs. They were like minus 100 res Doriani Mercs. But keep that in mind when you're making your decisions. I still think this will be pretty solid, and I'll be doing some test run on this probably, hopefully before the start. If I get the time to, I would like to make a video on it. So we'll see if I can get around to doing that. And then last but not least, the Righteous Fire Scion. This is just currently my favorite version of Righteous Fire. I may be tempted to end up trying an Elementalist Righteous Fire run, but I'm not convinced late game it will compete with the Scion. I think the Scion might still be the king, especially with that new Red Dream, and potential for the Scion is huge because Scion has probably the lowest opportunity cost of any Ascendancy when it comes to adding in a Bloodline Ascendancy. Scions only have to lose 3 passive points to trade for a Bloodline Ascendancy of any choice. For example, the Scion could use the Val Ascendancy for permanent RF uptime. The Scion has built-in flash charge generation. It has some built-in duration scaling with malevolence, efficacy. All you really need is that Shepherd of Souls corruption tag, and next thing you know, you're off to the races, and I think that could be very, very strong to consider. So yeah, those are 4 ascendancies from, or 4 builds from 326 that didn't get nerfed, and I think are very considerable for either your second or your third build. You can league start some of these. For example, you can league start Energy Blade Inquisitor. It's decent on league start. It was really good on league start when Sanctum was good, but now that Sanctum's nerfed, its money making is a little bit hindered by that. Righteous Fire Scion is just kind of a mediocre Righteous Fire start. Definitely below Elementalist, definitely below Chieftain or Inquisitor on a start, or it can be maybe okay-ish comparable to Inquisitor, but it doesn't start to really scale until you get that initial Balbala Ivory Tower stuff going. So keep that in mind. It has a bit of a late bloom. Necromancer, Animate Weapon, I do want to do some league start testing with, so I'm hopefully going to do that. And then Cast and Crit Forbidden Right, straight up play something else until you know for sure Whispers is going to be in your budget. That's kind of like pick a build that you like in Witch and plan on a reroll, or just be okay with leveling a second character. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed a look at some of these builds for 326, and happy theory crafting on all the new stuff going on. I, of course, am going to be working on my own theory craft for what I'm going to league start. I'm not going to be league starting any of these. I want to league start something fresh I haven't done before. Right now, I'm thinking about Cobra Lash, Nightblade Assassin, but we'll see if that continues to be my thought process. I'm guessing when they keep revealing more Bloodline Ascendancies, that's going to spike my interest for other builds. So we'll see in the coming days what I end up settling on. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one, guys.